Their subcommittees, they got another lesser committee that they form on a regular basis, but other committees. But the real work is done in the committees. And once the issue is hashed out in the committee, then it's brought back to the whole, and that's where they pass a bill. But the real duties of a representative body is to look into the issues that issue, the issue that the committee is charged with. So that's where the real work gets done. And in that idea, there's almost no limit to how big a chamber can get. 1,000, the House of Lords in England has 1,000. They have more.
They have 1,000 in the House of Lords?
Yeah, in Greece, in ancient Greece, the Ecclesia, which was their lower chamber, had 6,000 members at its largest size. They had a Senate called the Bullis that had 400, and then it was raised to 500.
But what city-state was that?
Greece, Athens.
Oh, the city-state of Athens.
Yeah. Yeah, they had 8,000. There were about 100,000 people, and they had 8,000 in their, or 6,000 in their lower chamber. And Sparta at one time had a chamber that was 12,000. Or 10,000, excuse me, 10,000.
That must be why they were able to maintain their democracy so long.
Yeah.
Because people felt a part of the government.
Yeah.
There was enough people
without a doubt,
that actually were making decisions.
Yeah.
I think you could walk down and meet 1,000 people right here in Santa Maria or in Santa Barbara, and they'd say, I have nothing to do with the government. I don't know anything about the government.
Yeah.
I never participate in the government, and I can't get them to answer the phone.
One of the most powerful things from England was the issue of, it used to be unicameral, the Parliament as they had it, and you go all the way back to Edward the Confessor, and if you ask the question, well, how many knights were part of his Parliament? And it was easy, 12 from every county. But it was unicameral, and after a while, after Edward the Confessor came in, it was mostly by blood. It was basically his relatives, and they were the ones who ruled the kingdom. And finally, a man named Simon de Montfort came forward, and they were fighting with the king because the king was entering all these wars, and he was just costing them lots of money, and a lot of people were dying. What he did was he called the first parliament, which was basically, he called all the mayors and aldermen of all the cities, and that became the first lower chamber.
What year was that?
Boy, I'd have to say 1258, I think. And it was about 1258, and, or 1245, somewhere in there. And anyway, that became the House of Commons, and they did it to stop the king from having wars. So it's sort of transcended today, so the House, the House of Representatives is supposed to declare war.
So that's why they have the House declare the war.
Yes, exactly.
And that's why the people fill up that chamber.
You got it, yes.
And the people suffer the ravages of the war.
You got it. And they pay, and they pay the most. Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And
why don't they teach this to our children in school? They didn't teach me this 40 years ago. I think I was in high school 20 years ago, but I can't remember. The
most powerful aspect of whether or not you have access to your representative chamber comes down to its ability to fortify our rights. And it was famously read. One of my absolute favorite law archetypes, I would call him, Sir Edward Coke. And I call him Coke because his name is C-O-K-E. And if you say Cook, everybody says, oh, you mean the guy who was sailing in the South Pacific?
Right.
He was the Speaker of the House of Commons in, I think it was 1593. And he was running an excellent parliament. Queen Elizabeth was queen. And he stopped in front of the Commons. He said, I'd like to tell you your story. He closed the book. And he says, I'm going to tell you about your story about how the House of Commons came. And he said at one point in time they were unicameral. And all of a sudden, the Lords wouldn't let the Commons speak. And finally, the commoners all moved to a different side of the House, and they all sat by themselves, and they wouldn't participate. And the king said, what is the meaning of this? And one man spoke up, and he said, because, sire, each one of us sits here, though fortune and blood inferior, each one of us represents 1,000 men. 1,000 men. They were all elected there by 1,000 men. And the king recognized that. And that was the very first time that ever that a man in the House of Commons was able to speak. Because, sire, each one of us represents 1,000 men.
And even the king recognized that.
Yes. And
what year was that?
It was about it would have been in the 1560s or so. But yeah.
And after that,
they got slowly the evolution of rights came. Slowly what happened was the House began having the rights to speak in the chambers. They had the right not to be arrested if they were being called in from Parliament, because I mean there was a funny aspect that said it used to be a calamity to be called to the House. To be elected I mean, there were nights that would they sought out to get charters that would permanently exclude them from being part of Parliament. It was seen as a horrid thing, and he said oftentimes a man was chosen because he was stout enough to take the trip, or he owned his own horse. So I mean, people were chosen for that thing, and he said, beyond that, what was gained but tired buttocks and an empty purse? He said you would be sent 400 miles away, you'd vote the tax against the community, you'd hurt everybody. And he says, what the hell was gained from this?
I can see why nobody.
Oh yeah, no,
nobody really wanted to be elected.
But slowly and surely, the towns that sent them started realizing, gosh, we can get statutes for this. And it used to be that the only time you would call Parliament was for money, solely for money.
Let me bring us forward into the United States.
Okay.
We have this tiny little state.
400, just 400.
400, is it? Okay, 400 assemblymen, what is it?
They have 24, 24 senators. And interestingly enough, their Senate is now a majority women. They now have, of the 24, I think 13 or 14 are now women. They're the only chamber in history in America that has a majority of women.
I was noticing in your brief, as I skipped through the foot-thick document, I mean, I would think the judges in the federal court hate you because somebody's got to read through that, and I'm sure the federal judge isn't. He's going to give it to his law clerk, isn't he?
Well, he might, yeah.
He's going to give it to his law clerk and say, "Look at this."
A lot of it's charts. So I mean, it's not so.
You have a photograph there of the 400 assembly members of New Hampshire, all squeezed into this chamber.
And it's crazy because it doesn't look. You say, well, 400. Wow, that's nuts. Well, no. If you look at the 400 and you say, well, that 400 represents the 1.2 million people in New Hampshire. That's not really that crazy. It really, you look at the picture and it's like, wow. And what's even more interesting to me is I've sent emails and I've had regular correspondence.
I saw that.
They
answer you.
Yeah, they answer me. I mean, that just beyond belief.
You can't get Hannah Beth.
Well,
what's her name?
No,
Hannah Beth Jackson?
No, Pedro Navas.
Oh, Pedro Navas. You can't get him to answer you.
No,
you
nothing.
can't get Abel Maldonado to answer you.
Yeah, no.
Nobody in our state legislature will bother to even answer their email other than with one of those blanket automatic responder messages is all you get from them. You got sitting representatives in New Hampshire, and one of them looked like he was afraid you were in his district.
Yeah, and
he hadn't answered you soon enough. Yeah, and he was worried about that.
He didn't get back to me in 2 months, and then he said, I'm sorry, and I was just asking what their budget was, and he got back to me 2 days later after 2 months after he realized he missed the email, and he said, oh, we're 17 million in the black. Yeah.
In the good.
Yeah.
In New Hampshire.
Yes.
Well, the rest of the states are in the red.
Are in so red, drowning.
So having more assemblymen would actually get us to a balanced budget.
Yes.
It would get the common people in there instead of loaded with lawyers and lobbyists.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they would cut that budget. They'd find a way. They'd have enough people to fill all the committees, wouldn't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so odd when you look.
So what if the federal court looked at your lawsuit, and let's just supposing I'm trying to think of a federal judge in the 9th District who might end up with this actually. Take Smith. I don't know if there is a Smith.
Okay.
He actually reads it.
Yeah.
And he says, hot damn, this is the solution. This is the solution. We're going to unplug our docket and get rid of all these improper lawsuits. If we give the people back their legislature, I order them to increase it in the next reapportionment to 1,000 assemblymen. Would that make you happy, or do you still have to be larger?
Well,
your chart says we should have 12,000.
Yeah, well, they have to base it on something. One of the best, well, just in general, it's reason. It has to be reason. So you're saying 1,000, and I'm saying, well, 1,000 still point blank is arbitrary.